in. Thank you for joining in today. We're in conversation with Radha Pandey, who's right here on the other rectangular screen you see in front of you. And really nice to have you guys over. Hey, Kamna! And so many more people joining in. Okay, super. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for everyone else who's coming in to, join in slowly. Great. I'm just going to wait another couple of minutes, Radha. Maybe it's 6:01. Maybe we can start in another minute or two, I think.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great. So hi again, everyone, to another round of Guftgu. And we're here with Radha Pandey today, who is a bookmaker. And she's been working with, we're going to discuss different aspects of bookmaking with Radha, of course, starting from one of her books to other projects that she's working on, her experiences with papermaking. I know a lot of you out there very curious about her practice and also about papermaking. I'm sure it's something that you were just like, what does that have to do with what we're discussing over here? And I think with Radha's work, as you see her books, and she'll share some images of her process, things will start becoming clearer. Just to give you guys a brief introduction, although I think by now I see a lot of familiar names and faces. I'm Anshika, and I'm the founder of Offset Projects, where we try and get people to think about books and hopefully dream about them and engage with them a little more than they're used to. We put a specific focus on artist books or visual-based books. And the idea is to kind of read them not just from the technicalities and the form and structure, but a structure of what the artist wants to say, but the possibilities and the layers of so many other conversations that we have with books, like with literature books. And today we have Radha Pandey with us. Hi, Radha. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Radha, we've managed to catch hold of Radha while she's still in Delhi. And we're lucky to know that she was free and happy to talk to us about her work and her process as well. Radha, I know that you've obviously studied papermaking and bookmaking, and you're also a letterpress printer. She studied from the University of Iowa, where, if I'm not mistaken, you also take some sessions and classes, or you might, if I'm not wrong.
Take? What do you mean take?
Like take some classes as a teacher or as an instructor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so after I graduated, I taught there shortly a few classes, yeah.
Amazing. And Radha's books are also in a lot of public collections, including the Library of Congress, the Yale University. And I know that she has a specific fascination for Indo-Islamic papermaking techniques, which is also something that's part of the work that she's currently practicing, maybe because it's on Mughal floral portraiture from the 16th century. And we'll talk a little bit more about that slowly, but I think maybe what we might want to start with is taxonomy of shapes. Yeah? Cool. So Radha, if just to kind of give you guys a little brief, because I know, unfortunately, I do not own one of Radha's very beautiful books. They are very, very limited edition in some cases, but very beautifully handmade books. And Radha's got some of her books with her to show us, and also images of some that she'll be sharing with us. Radha, do you want to tell us a little bit about taxonomy of shapes to just kind of get started with what you had in mind when you thought of making the book?
Sure. So that book was actually a bridge from my thesis work. And I thought of it when I was doing all the research and reading for my thesis work, which was titled Anatomia, Botanica, which is another artist book. And so the book that I was reading was called Naming Nature, and it was about the scientific classification, the taxonomical classification of nature and everything in it. And so I just kind of became fascinated by the history of taxonomy and evolution and how the world was perceived before kind of modern science, found nature. And so in that world, everybody was a scientist. Everyone could collect things and have, cabinets of curiosities in their homes and discover species and discover plants and all that kind of thing.
Right.
And so one of the first things that started happening after that period was that things started getting classified into different categories. And initially that was based on its appearance. And so, you would say a certain plant belongs to a certain species because it looks like that other species. And so you'd club them together. So based on appearance. And that changed with time as well. And what happened was, or what this book revealed was that evolutionary change wasn't taken into account when breaking down everything into its taxonomical category. Right. So even though you want to keep this particular plant or fish in this box, it's going to be evolving itself out of that box. And so it's kind of hard to contain things like that, like idea of evolution in a grid or in a box. And so Taxonomy of Shapes was really about that, questioning why that is. And so it's the taxonomy of the circle, the square, and the triangle. Right. And the book explores why can't the whole world then just be categorized according to into basic geometric shapes, the circle, the square, and the triangle. So I have some pictures to show everybody.
That would be really nice.
To explain.
Yeah.
So this is what the book looks like when it's opened out. And you can see this first spread acts as a grid. And so it's a collection of 60 or 70 objects, man-made and natural objects. And then the forthcoming pages open out into these, the same spread actually printed again, but with a map fold on top. This map fold has the circles cut out of it. And then the subsequent ones have square and triangle.
Can we also see the subsequent? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's the whole book opened out. So the format is a throughout accordion. And one of the reasons I chose that was so that this map fold would work. So it kind of pops out and becomes flat when you view the book as a codex. But when you view the book like this, they stay in the shape. That's another view. So you can see the square and the triangles there. So weird things start coming into the same category, like for the circle, a clock, an onion, the moon sometimes.
I was just looking at the kind of objects that you had going layered under the circle, square, and the triangle. And I'm just, for some of the people who've joined us today, I know some terminologies might be new to them. So I'm just going to backtrack a slight bit and just talk about, like you said, it's a basic throughout accordion. But within that, you also have another layer of folds that kind of, create the looking at the objects through the prism of the taxonomy of the circle, square, and triangle. And would that fold be called something specific, or?
So in this case, it's a map fold. And there are many different kinds of map folds. And I think that word only comes from the way maps were folded at one point.
Collapsible kind of.
So that, it's a giant piece of paper that can collapse into something smaller.
Right. And also if you could just help our people just with the word codex so that they have a reference.
Sorry. No. When I said that when it's read as a codex, in the codex format, I meant like you would handle any other book.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, we're all getting used to new words and things around us.
So that's the cover. So there you have the title and then the circle that tells you maybe you're dealing with circles, Taxonomy of Shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you open it, you see the square and the triangle.
Right.
Like this. So here actually, the first page has a square cutout, and then the second page has this triangle cutout. And then you open it and see all three shapes together. And then the next following page is that key.
Right. And so in some ways, the circle, I mean, by the placement of their presence on the cover itself is almost like a coding language, right? Like these are your kind of triggers to decode or maybe reassume or unassume the different elements that you've got in your larger spread out, right?
Exactly. So it kind of functions as a key in a map.
Right.
And so none of it, there's no actual text except for the title until you reach the colophon, which is at the end of the book. That kind of explains what you just went through. So that's the next spread, which is the circle spread. And then that's the last spread, which is the triangle spread.
Right. I think it might be nice to maybe go to the reference point. I mean, the larger, to that spread and talk about like what were the factors that, I mean, how did you come upon the list of these objects, right? Because like you said, I mean, it's also kind of looking at how evolutionary cycles have to then be, perceived within these three geometric prisms to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, so I started with a lot more shapes. And that's because I also wanted the rectangle in there because human beings are rectangles.
Human beings are rectangles.
And whales are rectangles, and I really wanted a whale.
Okay.
But I figured that a rectangle is a secondary shape. So I really just wanted the three primary geometric shapes.
Right.
So that was one thing that kind of culled a lot of the things I wanted in there. And then I just started thinking, I just started drawing all the, triangles that I could possibly think of around me in my life that were very, very obvious.
Right.
And started making connections that way. And then I went to the circle. The circle was actually kind of the hardest, which seems strange.
Really?
Yeah, it seems strange because I was like, okay, the moon, but it's not always a circle. The mouth, but only when it's open. So things like that. So natural, there are many things in nature that are circles and many things in our lives that are circles, but they're not always perfect circles. And so nothing is also never, it's never a perfect square either. So making, just coming up with a general shape, like the apple is in the square category. I made this book in the States and all the apples look like squares or looked like squares to me. But in India, they're all definitely circular for me.
Right. Did you start also then decoding people and personalities within squares, circles, and triangles?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone a while ago. They were teaching a workshop, metals, and she'd give people these three shapes to start with, and certain personalities would pick out squares, certain would pick out circles, and certain people would start with triangles.
Right.
But I really thought I was a circle person until this book, and it turns out I'm a triangle person.
Yeah, I think you are a triangle person. That makes sense. So what is a triangle person though for you? Let's kind of do self-observation. Little like.
Oh dear, I walked into that one. Unsure. I relate to that icon. I relate to the nose.
Okay.
And the grapes.
Right.
So make of that what you will.
I have some ideas, but we will keep it for after the webinar talk.
Okay.
I mean, but it's interesting to note, I mean, how you are actually thinking of evolution within geometric patterns. And I mean, of course, you took us through through a brief ideation curve in that sense. But I've noticed that is, I mean, it's a question that you have across your book practice. I mean, you might be dealing with botanicals, or you might be uh, dealing with, like something like Deep Time deals with a completely different aspect of maybe ecology or climate change, or but it is kind of very self-reflective. It's kind of, there's a massive presence of you being you questioning in the book itself, and so for you, I mean, what does the book do? What is paper, creating paper, what does the book do as an exercise of expression, you know
I'd say that that's only one form of my expression for
Okay.
an idea. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a book.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a sculpture, or it can be an animation.
Right.
So, I mean, I'd say I tend to gravitate towards working with paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's just because I'm passionate about the material. And the book form is something I came to much later, or thinking of my work in the form of a book took much longer than maybe what it appears, but it took a while for me to see my work in a narrative form and think of an idea as a narrative structure,
Right.
and think of an actual physical structure, not taking away from the concept that I was trying to convey, but either adding to it or being a transparent vessel.
Right. And maybe we can discuss that with in context to, let's say, I mean, I was going to suggest Deep Time because it's one of my absolute favorites
I can
from
pull up
your
some
books.
pictures here.
But if you have a different book through which maybe you wanted to talk about it, we can do either book, but Deep Time is one I have a soft spot for sure.
Sure. I'll just share some pictures of that. So that's the book open. Okay, so let's go to this one. That's the front page. It's actually a pretty small book. It's 4.25 inches by 6 inches. 6 inches.
Okay.
And it's a stack of sheets. And when you remove that first sheet, you see something that looks a bit like this. So you see a cavernous space with the color, changing throughout. Yeah, and the entire book sits in a box like this. And so you're meant to see it by lifting one page and placing it in this cavity. And so there are 15 such spreads that I have to say very few people have the patience to get through to the very last spread, which has the text that tells you what tells you what the book is about. And so that's the text spread there. And then after that spread is the colophon, which tells you how the book was made and the materials and things like that.
Right. I mean, for me, one of the things that actually that immediately kind of make me go back to this book so many times is almost like this kind of investigation of the self that's also happening. Like, like, let's say, even within this image, it's almost like looking at the surface of the earth, but at the same time, with the paper cuts that the hand paper cuts that you've done for the different contours of land, let's just say, that exist on the surface, and that presence of water that's slowly taking over is also, becomes very evident. So that there is a process and a journey that's happening in some ways when you open that box to the first page itself, and then it's almost like a very slow meditative passage of time, because the act of lifting every single sheet off the 15 sheets of paper, I'm quite sad to know actually not many people have the patience for it, because for me that was the joy of it and the thrill of it, and to kind of see water take over land in that sense. And obviously, till one arrives at the last page where one then realizes the context in which you've also made it is the same. And I think, one of the things that I did want to even talk about was how you worked with inks specifically for that, for deep time as well, because I know you created these inks and you wanted a particular tonality of color as well, which is why you did that. And if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I'm glad you said that, because time is the crux of the book, clearly. And it was very hard to figure out how to represent time in a book format.
Right.
And that was one of the biggest hurdles. I think it took me a year of just thinking and sitting with the idea to figure out how to do that. And one of the ways I knew I wanted to represent time was to talk about erosion and sedimentation and the action of water with soil and soil with water, and how they have shaped our planet. And so the color that I wanted to use for water was indigo, and the color that I wanted to use for soil, I thought, was walnut. And so I tried with walnut. I dyed paper with tea. Ultimately, what I ended up using was cloves. And so that brown that you see, the paper is actually really white. So I dyed it with cloves to make it that brown. And so when the sheet of paper is dipped in indigo, it displaces the clove, and that's what gives that dyed line. And so that actually was an accident that happened when I was over dyeing a sheet of paper with indigo. And it was an aha moment, because I thought, okay, so I can use this. This is what I can use to show how water and soil interact with each other on paper.
Right.
Yeah. So natural dyes are something that I've been toying with for a while. It's very, very hard to control them on paper and on cloth. But I'm still learning how to use them and how to not control them. I think it's an exercise in letting go.
Which is usually the toughest bit about coming to the final stage of making the book, is so many different aspects of the concept is, one gets attached to. And I think in some ways the entire process of book making is also about letting go, to a certain degree, because you start with like this wide range of ideas and you want to have everything, participate in the book. And in the process of coming together to that, you have to learn to let go of some stuff, maybe. And just from that point of view, I also wanted to know, how is it that you would approach a book? Like, I mean, I know that you did mention that it's not just the book that that would be your means of kind of expression in some ways, but for you to, let's say, to say that, okay, I'm going to start with the idea of sedimentation or talking about tidal waves, and from starting from there to then figuring out that the focus of the narrative that you would pick up for the book would in essence be that of time, because that is something that holds every single leaf of dyed paper, together. And so essentially it is a book that you're trying to create about time, which sounds very ambitious and completely, intangible in some ways. And yet from there you kind of figure out a process for yourself to make what you did. And if you can share that kind of a process, I mean, do you have a particular process that you implement from ideation to book?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading. So I read a lot about the forces of sedimentation and erosion. It sounds very dry, but it was actually very exciting. Yeah, it was very exciting.
Right.
And I wanted to know what land masses were shaped by these forces. And so those are the shapes that you see cut out are the highest shapes on our planet that were formed because of these two processes. Okay. And so I took a world map, a physical world map, put it on the wall, traced out those shapes, scaled them down to the size that I thought my book would be. And then kind of just placed them in relation to each other as they would be, not in the world, but on the page in relation to how they would live in the book. And then I knew I wanted to cut them out and create this space. So that took a really long time to figure out how I would actually sit and cut 15 sheets to make them line up like that times 35, which was my
Yeah,
edition
I was going to say
size.
that's one book, 15 sheets.
I'm still not done cutting.
Right.
And then all those lines that we saw carved into, printed on each of those sheets are different on each sheet of paper. And so those are from the area around Mount Everest. So a lot of it was looking up research papers that people had done on Mount Everest and mapped the area. So a lot of topographical maps. And then looking at the maps, figuring out this is the area that I want to focus on. And then it actually goes from low altitude to high altitude as you go through the book. Mm-hmm. So all those lines become tighter and tighter. And so I selected, parts of that map that I wanted to represent on those pages as you progress through the book. So a lot of elements kind of were coming together, and I was just kind of hoping for the best. But I did sit and draw them out. I made polymer plates, which is like a photosensitive plate, and I did a set of test prints to see if their progression works. Mm-hmm. And after that, I just did a test run with scraps of paper that I had dyed in the progression, and it worked fairly well. So I decided to just go for it. I ordered the paper that I wanted to work with. I didn't make paper for that book. Figured out how to audition the dyeing. Then I printed all of them, and then I sat and cut all of those things. And all of those lines are printed using wood engraving. Okay. So all those blocks had to be carved out. It took about 6 months to carve 15 blocks, which actually shocks me because I thought it would take a lot longer. Right. Sorry?
I was just curious, did you carve those blocks as well then?
I did, yeah. Right. So those are end grain maple blocks. So okay. You can get a fairly fine line, carve out a fairly fine line, which is why I chose that medium. And it also takes a lot of time. So for the person that's gotten to the colophon and is reading about how it's made, the impact, I'm hoping for the impact of the book to really come through in the colophon when you're reading about the time that it actually took to make this book, which might seem like a really long time until you think of the content of the book and what that's trying to say. Mm-hmm. So I actually found a video of someone going through the book, so I'll just share that.
Lovely. And so, the text page is the colophon, right? Because there is a question for that too.
There's 2 pages of text. So hopefully this video will show it. I didn't make this video, but they were gracious enough to share it with me. So that's the text page, and then there's another page after that. That's the colophon.
Right. Tamanjeet, I hope
that's the colophon. Okay.
Yeah. Tamanjeet, I hope that also answers your question. You did, because you wanted to know which page was the colophon. Great. So I know
Tamanjeet has seen that book in person, so he should know the answer to that question.
Okay. Well, then, there we go on that. So, I mean, I know you didn't make the paper for Deep Time, but you have obviously also worked a lot with paper. It's one of the, your specializations and maybe obsessions as well, because I know you've been experimenting with different paper making techniques, and you've also studied it very extensively. And I just wanted to know what does paper mean to you? I mean, I know it's kind of an abstract question and maybe something we can go on forever about, but
oh no, okay. I'm not sure what it means to me. I know that I love how it feels, and I think that it forms a really important part of what I'm trying to say in a book. So it's definitely not, it's never the last thing that I think about. It might be the second thing that I think about after I come up with the idea. is
Right.
what kind of paper should this project be on. An example of that is there's a book that's been cooking in my brain for about 2 years on indigo and the history of indigo in India. And the paper that takes dye the best is kozo, or Japanese mulberry, or
Not rice paper.
commonly known as rice paper, which is a misnomer. Strike that from all your brains.
Yes.
So kozo takes dye the best, and I would love to make that book in kozo. And that's the reason I haven't made it, because the book is about the history of indigo in India. So it shouldn't be on a paper that's Japanese mulberry. It should be on paper that's typically Indian, if that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
So that's an example of that. Another example of the paper coming first or second is this book that I did called Memory of Long Ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some images from that book. So it's a book about, let's say, white and our perception of the color white. And
that's a good way to put that.
yeah, I just don't know how else to. Okay, can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Just make it bigger. So the idea of this book, actually, I was already thinking about this while I was making Taxonomy of Shapes, because I was doing that as part of a residency in Women's Studio Workshop, which is in upstate New York, in the dead of winter, and I was surrounded by snow, a lot of snow, white.
Hmm.
And I was reading a book about white and snow. And so
Really in the white zone.
yeah, so I was thinking about it a lot. And when I started working with this paper fiber called abaca, which is a member of the banana family, those two ideas kind of just came together. So one of the first things that I thought of was how if you beat a fiber long enough in a beater, which is how you pulverize fiber to make it ready for paper making, it becomes, especially this fiber, becomes very translucent and thin, see-through. And using that quality of paper, the less you beat it, the more opaque it is. So initially I had thought of, I'm just going to stop that for a second. Initially I thought of actually using that particular quality of the process of beating.
Okay.
And try to, come up with different densities of paper that way to kind of showcase different kinds of white. So this is the same fiber, but beaten different lengths of time. So this is beaten 6 hours, for example. This is beaten only 4 hours. So it's more opaque than this one.
Right.
And so kind of layering them and trying to use the inherent qualities of the paper to talk about this idea. And so the way I was thinking about this idea, besides, paper, was literally drawing, writing my ideas of what white are. So it ended up, I was also thinking about ice, water, virgin, innocent. So that's the beginning of our perception of white. And from ice, I went down to icicles, build up, stalactite, sedimentation. So here we're back at kind of deep time. Right. So that particular stream of thought led to these two books. So it's not like one came before the other. They both kind of arrived at the same time, and one actually
running parallel.
Yeah, and one came out this way, completely white, and the other one came out, dyed in indigo.
Variations of color, yeah.
Yeah, so here you can see some like little scribbles of early thoughts on how I would do that. So this is my idea of build up. So building up either printed lines or different lengths of pages or folds in the paper. So that's how I kind of went about planning for that book, and eventually ended up at what I ended up at. And so these are my early tests for white. So it looks nothing like the book that I showed a little while before. So it was just, I was trying to play with light and play with all these shapes being cut out and making one whole shape. What does that do? How does that take away from the idea? So it turned out it took away from the idea. So I ended up with a
completely different.
Yeah, so I ended up with this. So here I wanted to talk about glacial melt. So I thought, okay, I can wax this really thin paper, make it extremely translucent, even more so, and then scratch into it.
Right.
And then scratch into all the subsequent pages, and then you have, so essentially this is above the water, and glaciers are huge under the water, right? So that's what I was trying to get at too. But here what I figured out was what I wanted my actual binding to look like, and figured out how the paper reacts to being waxed and how it reacts to this really simple binding and the fall of the actual sheets. Right. And that's the learning from that mock-up, which then finally I ended up being this book, which is the only book I've done so far that has no images. So it's only text, and the text is printed kind of fragmentary, little words on every page. That's the title page. Right. So it's actually quite a long, slim book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this big, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I have it here, so I'm just going to pull it up. Just give me a second.
Your pitara of books is
sorry.
Open. No, that's great.
So that's the cover. So of course I chose black because I wanted it to contrast with white, and the title is up there.
Yeah.
And then, oh dear, it's summer here, and the pages are waxed. So
yeah, how does that work? I mean, because a lot of the paper that you make and the treatments that you do are so sensitive to temperature.
I have to constantly be thinking about that, but really I'm printing the books to be seen in fluorescent light in the library.
Okay. So you do have a particular environment in which the books need to be seen as ideal.
Yes, indeed. So I know it's kind of bleeding out, but I'll try to hold it at the right angle. So that's the front cover.
I hope you guys are able to get a sense of. Yeah, I think that's a good.
That's better.
Yeah.
So all of these are unwaxed, and you're meant to go through them one at a time, which I won't do for the sake of the health of this book.
Yeah.
And my
but I think one is able to get a sense of it for sure.
Right. And then this is the waxed half, which you can kind of see the text. So the text is obviously printed in white, and it's pretty hard to see the text, which is kind of part of the whole deal. So the reader is really supposed to be touching the book and gently looking at it and trying to read it, and ultimately discovering the best way to read it, which is pretty much usually holding it against the light. I don't know if I'll be successful in showing that to you, but kind of.
Yeah, fair bit, yeah.
Kind of, you can read it pretty well if I hold it like this against the light. I can.
You can also get in touch with Radha and maybe purchase one of these books for a closer read into the book. but I mean, actually, in some ways it's. I can see like fragments of you as a person fall into how you create these books as well. The slowness of it, the quietness of it, how you kind of want to go into these tiny details, and in particular taxonomy scenario, the almost like that geeky obsession with like details and things of that sort, and so I guess in the sense of like how you create them and how you ideate with them, they end up following your personality as a language almost, in the way that you would create the books, right? And I'm assuming, and I could be wrong in this, that it takes a while to reach at that point where you know what your books are going to be like. And in some ways, do you think that that might always end up being consistent? Like, do you think like suddenly there might be something for which you would have like a book that's like the book that I was showing you, Animalium, which is like a massive size. It's suddenly like an A3 size book, which is like a burst of color. Like, do you think that it's a personality thing, or do you think it's a content thing, or they both uh, play different kinds of roles in it?
Yeah, I think different kinds of roles. I'm definitely more attracted to the smaller format, and mostly that's played into the content. So things that need a close read, or things that need to be held,
Mm-hmm.
to be experienced, which can only happen at that scale.
Right.
And so that would, I think, have to do with content. One of the other reasons most of the books are small is because for some of them I'm making the paper and I just can't make that much paper. I
Right.
just can't make that much paper for the edition that I would want to have.
Is that also a limitation in some ways to the number of or the edition that you do choose to have in a book?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this Memory of Long Ago book, I had a certain number of sheets and that's all I had. And so that
Right.
dictated my edition size. So the edition was actually 33.
Hmm.
Three of them went to the person whose text I used
Okay.
as my payment for using the text.
Right.
But it was going to be a little bit wider, but I could get 4 lengths out of one piece of paper if I
Okay.
chose this size, and so I
Right.
went with that size.
Okay. Makes sense. It's a matter of mathematics and logistics.
Yes, and cost, definitely.
Right. And I mean, I find it really fascinating with the degree to which you go into research mode. Like you're almost creating very, very distinct pieces of art as part of your research project in some ways. Like I have to say, like the little classroom of the work that you'd shown me just a couple of minutes ago before we started the
All
chat.
right.
Your 3-hour session on algebra and geometry to kind of figure out floral patterns in the 16th century. So I mean, it's quite interesting to see how deep you go into that, and how they kind of then begin to connect. And I mean, I was hoping to talk to you a little bit. I know we're kind of on 45 minutes already, but maybe we can discuss this slightly and then take up any questions for people who might have them. But if we can talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing right now, including obviously the quarantine time, but I know this started much before that.
Yeah. So I've been working on an idea for a while about, it's hard to put into words. So I still don't have the perfect pitch for this book.
I was going to say your 1 minute pitch program is what I was going to put out.
Yeah, so this book is about the colonialization of plants, essentially, and how that changed the lens through which we experience nature. So if you think of the Mughal period and you think of all the Mughal manuscripts that were produced, certain time periods within that Mughal period, there were some rulers that were keenly interested in nature and gardens and flowers, particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of their painters were commissioned to do portraits, floral portraits,
Mm-hmm.
and portraits of trees and things like that. Cut to the British, who come to India and see that it's rich and full of these amazing plants and flowers and all of these things that can essentially be commercialized.
Mm.
And you have a completely different kind of floral portraiture or plant portraiture
Yeah.
that's done solely for the purpose of commercial gain. And so not only did that destroy the existing aesthetic that we had, but it also changed how we're seeing nature around us. And so this book is about kind of that dichotomy, and how it affected our history and how it affected the kind of our book history, really. So I have a few slides of, it's still in the dummy stage.
Right.
So I haven't actually.
Thank you for the sneak peek on your dummy stage.
Okay.
But you said it also impacted our book history, and I'm quite intrigued to know a little bit more about that. Like, how did it make an impact in how we were making books or reading books or chronicling our histories of botanical?
So our observations then changed from nature to something quite different, ostentation,
Right.
or the darbar kind of arena. And that also obviously depended on the personality of the ruler.
Right.
Aurangzeb wasn't really interested in flowers and stuff. But it also changed, all of those painters that were employed by the Mughals were now employed by the Brits to make their type of botanicals. And so that skill, even though it was used, it wasn't used in the same way.
Right.
And so that kind of expression changed. And with the British also came, or with the Portuguese, came printing and the printing press.
Right.
And so once that happened, I mean, these books were not meant to be reproduced at that scale, and they weren't. And so, but the botanicals that the British were producing for their own archives or whatever were produced at that scale. I have some pictures of that actually.
I mean, in recent history, there's been this sudden surge of vintage botanical drawings again that's kind of come up.
Yeah, so those are the botanicals that I'm talking about that are really more insidious than they seem.
Right.
So
the evil botanical drawings.
So that's the book. So that's the size. So I've decided on the size. I know it's really hard to tell what the size is, but it's the biggest book that I've
Small
made.
is that's exciting.
So there you can kind of tell the size. And so it's kind of like a double. I don't know how that image got in there. So it opens out like this. So it has one spine, and then it has another spine here, another spine here. So these two panels open out further, like so.
Right.
And then within it, it houses these two books. So this one is going to follow a Western book format, opening this way, and this one is going to follow an Islamic manuscript format, opening this way.
Okay. Is that why it's kind of right to left? Because
that's right.
One would read Persian also, or
yes, yeah, and they're going to be talking to each other in a sense. So this is going to be only illustrations, and this is going to be like the reader for the illustrations.
Right.
Here's a taste of the illustrations. So it's not really miniature style. I would say it's like a bastardization of that style. I plan to make it as a book back then may have been made. So books back then were collaborations.
Right.
And so I plan on collaborating with a miniature painter and a Sanji artist.
Right. Who's also, I mean, who's a local artist that you have?
Yeah. The miniature painter is based in Delhi.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm using this grid to place my images, and this grid is based, so this grid is based on a Mughal manuscript from the 16th century, a typical Mughal manuscript proportion. And they're on tracing paper because I'm going to be transferring these to a block and doing wood engravings, over which the miniature painter will be adding either detail or basically it's up to him what he wants to do. So we still haven't gotten to that part yet.
That's his part of the work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what else can I say about this book? So all of these plants that I've chosen are plants that have no commercial value except beauty. So
that's the ostentatious line of...
Yeah, so that's the whole purpose of this, to actually showcase plants that have zero commercial value.
Right. And so again, in terms of like, I mean, I know of course a big stage of your research would help bring down to, you know, your list of the kind of elements that you'd want to include and incorporate. And I thought, I mean, one of the things that was really interesting was when you spoke about traditionally bookmaking being a collaborative project. I mean, bookmaking of this particular kind in specific, let's say, to be a more collaborative project. And I mean, in some ways, I know we've been talking about photo books to a certain degree, but even otherwise, books are sometimes connected, understood to be collaborative or not. But I mean, I'm curious to know, uh, for you, how much of a book is a collaboration? Because I know that, I mean, for you, it's an object that you create from scratch very often. Let's just say.
How much of it is a collaboration?
I mean, because
So
this is
far,
probably the first book in which there is a very definite collaboration of this sort, right?
yeah, so far I haven't really done any of that. I think the only thing that I have collaborated on is using someone else's writing for this
Right.
book.
Mm-hmm.
So I took permission and asked him if I could use it, and his
And 3 books
assistant
were
replied yes.
made.
Yeah, so actually, so that's pretty much the only one that I collaborated on. So this is my first venture of the kind, but I really wanted it to reflect the same spirit of the Islamic manuscript. And as I mentioned, they're not meant to be mass produced. So it's also a little bit of an experiment to
Right.
see, you know, how does a miniature fare when it's printed using, you know, wood engraving.
Right. Well, it's a work that I'm really looking forward to. I know. I mean, there were a couple more images. Were they part of this book itself that we'd seen, the color work?
Oh, no. Are you talking about what I was showing you before this?
Yes, or is that not to be seen right now?
I can do it. It's not part of this book. It's my thesis work.
Right. Sorry. Yes.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. Karan Khosla wanted to know if I'm assuming the drawings that you showed earlier, was that a Nag Pushpa?
one was a bougainvillea,
Okay.
and one was a maltas, and next to it was a particular tulip that originated in Kashmir. Also, all of those, the flowers in the book originate in India, which
Okay.
is, to my surprise, champa is not from India.
What?
Hibiscus is not from here. Gulmohar, not from here.
Are you serious? These are
Just sad. I know. These are
you're shattering my like Delhi
jacaranda.
childhood, you know, and driving through Lutyens and just thinking.
Jacaranda, not from here. Marigold, not from here. Okay.
Okay,
So
this
this
is
is my
going to lead
thesis
to a
work.
different crisis. Let's get
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the
Let's focus.
Anatomia Botanica.
So this is my thesis work called Anatomia Botanica, and it is about 3 species of flowering plants that I saw around my growing up years. So the magnolia, the hibiscus, and lotus. So all of these are printed using linoleum, and they all have movable parts like this.
Right.
And the text is all metal type. This is a linoleum block, and this is a little gloss. It's called a gloss. So I have some, to help you understand what I just said, I have some references here.
But
Okay.
so, I mean, in some ways, looking at botanicals has been a bit of an obsession right from the beginning, right?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I think that's a safe assumption.
Right.
So, okay, so that's the linoleum block being carved. So that's how I made the images on that book. It's reduction linoleum. So I go back and carve more and more of the same block to make multiple impressions. And those movable parts are printed separately and cut out.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's, the additioning process. I've already printed 2 greens. I'm going to be printing a third one, I think.
Okay.
And here I've just printed my final 4th thread, which is that little bit. So in the end, the block is just reduced to like this much and this little guy there. And I'm printing them on a press like this. I have a better image of this press, which I'll show you.
The minute I saw this, I wanted to say, bring it here, and I will come and like totally occupy your house, studio, wherever you're going to keep it.
And then back here, you can kind of see, so these are the references that I keep up when I'm printing, so that if I'm printing a large edition, I have to keep adding ink so that the inking stays consistent, and that reference helps me figure out that the ink is the same on the first spread, and it's the same on the 15th spread, and will be the same on the 30th spread, etc.
Right.
And that's the last little bit that I was saying.
Okay.
And this looks like a trick block, but actually there's a stencil, which is why all of this didn't print on the paper.
Okay, that makes
yeah.
And this was at the university itself, was it?
Yeah, yeah. And that's set type. So that's how I printed the type. So it's set upside down and backwards, and then it gives you this.
This bit.
And then you have to physically go in and go on these.
I mean, it's actually really beautiful to see this, because till I think about a decade or 2 ago, we still had a lot of letterpress units that were very active, let's say in Delhi as well. But I know that that they're a rare find today, or am I wrong on that? I don't know.
They're a rare find today.
Right. And because I know so many letterpress printing units had to shut down. In fact, there's a photographer from Bombay called Chirudeep Chaudhary who was obsessed with letterpresses. And I remember about a decade ago, he was in Delhi and we met once, and he had this massive grin on his face. And I was like, you look like you were up to some mischief. And his uncle used to run a letterpress, and they'd shut down, and they literally gave him the entire
wow,
it was alphabet and symbols, and like he just came with this huge box, and then he kind of like gave me a sneak peek of it, and I was so jealous at that point of time, because I was like, this is going to be so difficult to be able to get anywhere, now.
It's absolutely true. So that's the press. That's the press I printed that book on.
Right.
That image you already saw. So that's set type. It's kind of hard to read here, but that's how you would set your lines. That's what it looks like when it's just been printed, with the lovely natural light coming into the studio for that shot.
Good image.
And that's what it looks like on the press bed. So those are blocks of type, and I've left space for that linoleum block there. And that's the type case.
Okay.
So that's where the word uppercase and lowercase comes from. Uppercase, lowercase. Okay. But in this case now, all the uppercase is here and all the lowercase is here.
Okay.
And so you have to set it, letter by letter, line by line.
Wow, that's our trivia for the day, kind of. Yeah, but this has been it's been really amazing. I think a lot of it, to be honest, for me, is also taking in so much of like new information and processes, and that's been really exciting. I know we're hitting an hour, but if anyone has any questions, we'll probably take them, and then we'll probably take maybe one or two if anyone has any more questions. But so where do you go from here? Like what happens to this book? Because I know right now collaboration, I mean, just to be in touch with, the miniature artist who you would be collaborating with is already tough. So how are you working that dynamic out?
Yeah, his studio is not operating right now. So I told him that I'll just post him things.
Right.
And I don't have my studio now, so this is as far as I can go with
Yeah,
what I have. I have all the illustrations in place. I have the binding, which is a huge part, like a huge mystery solved.
right,
And I'm seriously procrastinating writing the text, so that's the next step.
right.
Um, and then once I do have access to my studio, I'll probably start carving the blocks and setting type, taking turns,
Yeah.
because both those tasks are pretty fatiguing. And then just do some tests to see what the image looks like, what my line quality ends up being.
Mhm.
Yeah, and remake this mock-up because it's a bit crappy.
Right.
And I just
So
wanted to.
usually, how would you work with like things like an ink? I know an anonymous attendee has said that they've requested if this session can be extended by half an hour. I would be more than happy to, but I don't know about Radha and the other people sitting on this.
I'm okay with that. If somebody has to leave, I'm not going to take it personally.
Perfect. So, I mean, maybe we can just continue chatting and, for those of you who have to log out and, attend to something else, we totally understand. Uh, and if anyone will be leaving us right now, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. And I hope I'll see you over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday at 6. Will be there updates on what the next two talks are all about on our Instagram post, and I hope you'll be able to keep up on the updates that we have there. And I'm quickly going to come back to this chat because Nidhi has a question. Nidhi actually wanted to know if you can suggest any book or resource material to study about paper, the different kinds and how they are made, and also for pigments and the papers that they respond to.
Pigments and all of that, I think, is just trial and error. Like, you just have to try. Unfortunately, there's no book that's been written about dyeing paper. And as for resources, there's a really good one called Papermaker's Companion by Helen Hebert,
A note of that
which
too.
it's a good intro, and she also has like really great ways you can make paper at home in your kitchen.
I'm actually maybe just going to put that on our chat so everyone can just have that resource name with them. It's called Papermaker's Companion, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I pulled up this image because that's where I got my inspiration for this binding. I wanted to do what's called a do-si-do, which is, this is not a typical do-si-do, but working through the sort of,
Okay.
yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, this one actually reads the same way. You'd have to flip the whole thing over to read it because that's the end, but it's kind of a riff on that. And then the Anatomia of Botanica is based on 16th century books of anatomy like this one. So I'm actually referencing a lot of historical books when I'm making my work. And so this is just a small example of how I'm doing all of the referencing.
Right.
So this is how people in the 16th century that didn't have access to cadavers would study anatomy. Because people actually started printing a human body in layers, and you could, so that's the top of the head with a little bit of hair on it. Then that's the next thing. That's the next thing. Then you open this.
But actually, that's so exciting. I mean, we talk about how we need to experiment with the book form now because we've had these standard book formats for so long. But I feel like people were probably more experimental with the book, at this stage because there weren't as many expectations from it or.
No, absolutely. There were lots of pop-ups and movables back then. We just don't know about them. And I just wanted to point out that he seems very much alive.
Yeah. Those eyes are kind of pierced through in a very defined way. Someone wanted to know if you come up with the structure of the book first or the concept.
It can go either way for me. So, for example, for the white book, I definitely came up with the concept first. And then I only came up with the structure when I made that tiny little dummy to work out an idea. And that was after lots of just mulling with brain work. In some cases, I don't have that example here with me, but there's a book that I made because I wanted to try the structure of a carousel book. So I had the idea of trying out that structure, and then I kind of fit my content into it, which, you know, a lot of people work like that too.
Right.
I'll try to pull it up.
Sure. While you're hunting for that, Patty Johnson actually wanted to know if you're accessing historical books online, or do you see these books, you know, in person in a museum?
Good question. So a little bit of both. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of digitization of Indian manuscripts at the moment, except for like a very specific genre that University of Pennsylvania has been doing.
Okay.
So in terms of that, I'm basically looking through all of my photographs that I took when I was at the University of Iowa, and I had access to their special collections library. I'd gone there, pulled out all of the Islamic manuscripts, which totaled to about 7, and took pictures of them. And so I'm referring to that and pictures people post online. And then for that book that I showed with the flaps,
right.
So the collection at the University of Iowa, the School of Medicine has those books and all the herbals from the 16th to the 18th centuries. So I was looking at those in person, which is how I was able to figure out how to actually make those flaps fit in and move, because I could actually turn the page and look at it against the light and see what was printed first, what was printed last, and how was it was assembled.
Right. I mean, it's tragic that, I mean, as you say, that we don't have that massive a resource to access as far as historical books are concerned, because it really seems that it would have been a helpful resource to look at in not just becoming maybe more comfortable with the books that we create today. And
Exactly.
there's a lot to kind of learn from there.
Right. And so I was pointing out those glosses in one of those spreads in Anatomia Botanica. So that's this is what I was referencing with that particular, those glosses next to the text. And this is an example of those botanicals. So this is from the 16th century, and it's Dutch. It's not English.
Okay.
But this is a sort of an example of the commercialization of plants.
Right.
And this is also a good example of collaboration, because somebody else has set the type and printed it. Somebody else has carved the blocks, and somebody else has printed them. And then for each of these, someone has gone and hand painted them. So, I mean, this edition was over 100, and
wow, okay,
it was hand painted. It's not very good image, so I'm not going to zoom in further.
No, but it's still.
But yeah, so
look at this than not, you know.
Yeah, so each of I think they had 2 copies in the library, so each copy was different because, you know, if you're hand painting something, it's not going to look the same.
Right. Does that happen even with a book like, let's say, Deep Time in some ways? Because, you know, the gradations of the indigo and I mean, the markers of land and sea are also kind of hand painted on them, you know, in some way.
Yeah, and the cutouts are different. Like the placement of the cutouts is starting to become a little different because I'm taking so many months to
right.
things.
Have you been sitting in quarantine and just cutting out sheets of paper?
Not at all.
Okay.
I don't have my edition here. So if I did, I would probably be able to finish it.
And so, I mean, also, how does something like this work? Because, you know, to create books in that sense, you really need access to your own materials and your own studio, you know, because not all of these materials can be put into your little zipper bag and carried with you. So, I mean, just out of curiosity, how have you been kind of dealing with making a book while not having access to as much material on where you can physically make it. Like I know like the sessions that you were talking about are one thing that also then takes up research work, so how is that happening? How is the bookmaking without the bookmaking going on?
Yeah, so I mean, it's tricky. I've been doing a lot of reading um, on like decoration in Mughal manuscripts.
Okay.
And I've been trying to find these online resources that I want to reference and going back to them and just looking at them, just the visual.
Mm-hmm.
Also thinking about natural dyes and if I want them to play a part in this. And so it's a lot of like cerebral work. But as you mentioned, I've also been taking these online geometry classes so that I can better understand how geometry was used in designing floral patterns and actually designing the page. And so I've done about 7 hours of geometry in 2 weeks.
Well done, you.
Great. But that's also helping me understand Sanji. And one of the ways I intend to use Sanji.
Sorry?
Sorry?
What's Sanji? Sorry.
Yeah, good question. Sanji is paper cutouts. So I'm just going to show you an example.
It's like I'm just like, tell me everything about what you do.
No, I'm just going to show you an example of where are you? Of what I mean.
Okay.
If I can get some back. Okay. Right, that's Sanji. And I'm sure you've seen it before, right? It's these giant cutouts or these tiny cutouts. Right. And they're all done by scissors and they do a lot of geometric patterns. And you'd see those geometric patterns in the Petrodura lattice work in architecture.
Right. I was actually just going to talk about architecture because the minute that I saw this, and also because you're talking about Mughal, florals and things like that.
Yeah, so this is kind of what, these are 16th century examples around.
Okay.
This one, definitely. So that's kind of what I'm referencing. This is not an Islamic manuscript. But I'm looking at the proportions of the page, how skinny this rectangle actually is, the image area, how full the image area is, the fact that it has a border, which also has a border, which has another border.
Yeah.
And the use of color.
I mean, in some ways, I guess there's such very well-defined markers of, particular kinds of artwork from a timeline, in the sense of, like you were saying, I mean, even presence of material like gold leaf was really prominently there as a part of the medium, for, I don't know about just botanical drawings, but, as part of miniature paintings for sure, in that timeline. And also, like you were talking about the thinness, so like the presence of panels as opposed to frames,
Right.
do these then impact how you would design the book as well? Like, I mean, would you think of using material like, or the color palettes that they have here, or things like gold leaf, or,
Yeah, I mean, that's basically why I'm looking at these in a sense, to look at the color and to look at the borders, which are pretty, I mean, that's what I think of when I think of a Mughal manuscript, Islamic manuscript, excuse me.
Right.
And so one of the things that I'm trying to figure out how to do is to make inks from natural dyes and try to print these borders. And then print the borders using an adhesive, a natural adhesive over which I can stick gold leaf.
Right.
So trying to combine a traditional technology with this, more slightly modern technology, letterpress printing.
I might have some notes to share because I've been looking up working with gold leaf and photography as well. So I've been research. We will share notes after this on. That was immediately I looked at that and I was like, gold leaf, I have a question. But no, but I mean, thank you actually for showing all of that. That was really amazing. I do know that maybe we might have to. Kamna just wanted to say this was an incredible and well thought out work in progress, and she can't wait to see it in person.
Me too.
Right. Sorry, I just wanted to check one more thing. The Papermaker's Companion, could you let me know who wrote it so that I can add that in?
Yes, it's
Sorry, it's just.
Helen Hebert. So Helen and then Hiebert.
Okay, there you go, guys. I hope that's right. But if it's not, you'll probably look it out on Google and they will autocorrect it for me. So Radha, I mean, tell me something. How does paper making? I mean, do you think of it as separate from bookmaking, the act of paper making? Because you said not everything is or needs to manifest itself in a book. You know, sometimes it can be just about the paper as well. And very often when we think of paper, it's not the work in itself. You know, it's always kind of a medium that's either used in a book or it's the base for laying out another artwork on top of it, right? But I know that for you, because you're also thinking about making paper, so in some ways creating paper is the art piece in itself. And how do you then begin to use paper as a creative expression contained within just the paper?
Okay, so I have an example by which I can answer that question.
I love how you have like these visual references for everything that we ask. It's like,
it's hard to explain.
No, it's perfect because I think it's such like immediate communication because of that. Like,
so this is my answer to that. So in this case, the paper is it's not the substrate, it is the image.
mm-hmm.
So this was an animation that I did. I wanted to try out making an animation using watermarks. So everybody's seen a watermark on a banknote.
Yes.
So that's usually made when you have differences between the thick and the thin areas of a sheet of paper when it's wet. So a sheet of paper is made on a mold like this, and water drains through and pulp remains on top of this jelly,
Right.
And so if you have something obstructing that drainage, like this, for instance, that's where thinner layers of pulp will settle. So when you actually finish the sheet and put it down or couch it, you get thick areas and thin areas, sometimes broken areas, which then you have to physically fill in with pulp.
Right.
So that's what it looks like when it's just come off the mold. Then you press all the water out of it and it becomes seamless, like your currency note. But when you hold it up against the light, you get something that looks like this, an image that you call a watermark. Right. So I wanted to explore that technique in an animation to see if you could actually animate a watermark. So to do that, you would have to make, if you wanted 50 frames, you would need 50 different unique watermarks. So that's basically what I did with this. So in that sense, the paper becomes the image, or in this case, the video.
Whoa.
So I'll play it again. Oh. So I played again. I know it's very short. It's only.
No, but it must have taken you ages to arrive at that really short stop motion, right?
It took me 1.5 years to get to this point.
Okay, ages was quite correct then.
So if you notice the trunks of the trees, they have this like blinky.
Yeah. It's like a flickering kind of a trunk.
Yeah, and that's because not all of them turned out so neat down there.
Right.
A lot of them were broken, like I showed you in that one image. And so I had to physically fill them in by squeezing pulp on. So obviously that's not something I could totally control. And so the thickness and the thinness of the paper varied with each sheet, whereas I was squeezing the pulp on. So.
And so how many versions did you have to work
Uh,
for something like this?
I did 4 per image, 4 sheets of paper per image, and hoped that one of the sheets worked.
Right.
Yeah, but before I actually reached this animation, I did another one to test that this one would work.
Mm-hmm.
And so
The safe
that,
ground.
yeah, just to play safe. So that one is this, where I did a book flipping,
Okay.
the pages of a book flipping. So sorry. So I got these pieces laser cut,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's the jig I used to place them in the same position on the mold.
Right.
And then that's me testing all the pieces. And that's another test.
Right.
Yeah, and then that's the video which was even shown in the last one, which you can't see because of the stamping. Yeah. So it's a loop because it's 1 minute because it's a loop,
Right.
but really it's. You know,
But that's amazing. That's really beautiful.
and you can see the background is like going nuts because
Yeah.
each sheet is unique, even in the way it's picking up the actual
Right.
mold surface and the way I'm putting it down.
I can
And the
see
thickness
like
of the
these
sheet.
scales of, I'm assuming what the drying bits were like, right? These vertical, yeah.
These are called chain lines and laid lines. So any paper before, I guess it was like 18th century, 18th century would have these kind of lines on it.
Oh, okay.
That's a traditional mold, and that's what it's picking up. The paper is picking up a watermark created by the mold. Sorry for the jargon.
No, I mean, for us, this is amazing for me because I don't think I would have gotten access to the jargon otherwise. So thank you. Uh, I think, I mean, I feel like, are you going to open one of these studios in Delhi anytime soon? All I need to know. Like, can I just come and just sit in one corner and just observe you do these things and then like.
That's the long-term plan, although I don't know how it's going to pan out.
Right.
Because having a studio requires money and buying equipment
Right
requires
now.
money. And at the moment, I'm out of work.
Yeah, I think
So,
right now we're all sitting and wondering, so where are we headed from here and what is meant to happen? And I mean, I know that you also are not in Delhi all the time. You know, you function between 3 countries and 3 time zones, and hopefully you'll be able to access all 3 time zones, you know, in when they need to be accessed, and I hope that happens soon for you. uh, but until then we can still plot and scheme,
definitely.
get a studio working here, and then slowly I will crawl in and find my spot and claim it.
I
But
have a press waiting to be transported to India from Norway. I just need
okay.
a place to put it and the money to transport it.
Well, if things go fine and we're able to maintain our offset studio, um, I'm happy to say you can park it there for a while, you know, and we can do a bunch of experiments on it. It'll be quite fun. Well, we had planned to do a bunch of experiments at the studio anyhow with some workshops over this year, but I think the world had different plans. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we were able to do at least one workshop to start things off.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, and I can see Sheetal is also here. And she's, you know, so I mean, hopefully there'll be more sessions and more conversations with you. Tamajit is very insistent and says, please offset, help her bring it. Trust me, Tamajit, if I can, I will, you know. If I could carry it and bring it down, why not? But we'll hope for a time when that's actually possible. And we'll hope that we can do more workshops and conversations and actually get to see more of what you do in India as well. It would be fun to do more. And
Yeah,
thank you
definitely.
so much for today. I know it
Thanks
was
for
kind of
having me.
like a beginners chat for beginners in bookmaking and papermaking for you, but I think we've had. I mean, I have definitely learned a lot, and I think there's a lot to think about. I was telling Danita, who's also here, I didn't notice about how you did the first session of just folding paper, and I was like, whoa, suddenly there are these little invisible locks in your head, and you were like, wait, I think there's a lot more space to think. And so hopefully more students of bookmaking uh, can get that experience. But thank you so much for today.
Very
And
welcome.
I hope to see you soon and more often.
Yep.
But thanks a lot. And thank you, everyone. I know we went a little extra today. Thank you to that anonymous attendee who requested for an additional half an hour. Yeah, thanks so much. Have a lovely evening. We have 2 more sessions this week. On Saturday, we have Vijay Villafranca, who's going to be sharing his book Simios with us, and also a sneak peek into a new dummy he's been working on. And on Sunday, we have a chef and photographer and curator, Kevin Wiley from Singapore, who will be joining in. And we have a little bit of a surprise coming for that talk. So please stay updated on our Instagram post and you'll know more. Thanks so much, and hope you all have a wonderful evening and a great dinner soon enough. It's hot in Delhi, so I know that I'm going to be probably having something light, as maybe you are, Radha, too. I don't know.
Definitely.
It's been quite boiling. But see you all soon, and good night.
Good night. Bye.
Sorry, one sec. We might have one more question. Oh no, Alka says thank you. Okay, that's fine. Bye.